A White Stone by Jim and Merry Corbett. Revelation 2 verse 17. He who is able to hear, let him listen to and heed what the Spirit says to the assemblies, churches. To him who overcomes, conquers, I will give to eat of the manna that is hidden, and I will give him a white stone with a new name engraved on the stone, which no one knows or understands except he who receives it. End of verse. From our Father's heart. How many people have seen my Son in your life? How many have chosen to serve me through my Son because they have seen him in you? How many have turned from their ways to my ways because of your ways? Does your neighbor know that you are my tabernacle? Does your enemy know that you are told to lay your life down for him and have agreed to do so? Do you know that I love the abortionist, the pornographer, the homosexual? Do you know that I have sent you to them that they might see my Son through you, so that they might accept him? Do you have the eternity of your every contact in mind when you address them? If not, why not? Chapter 1. Go out into the highways and hedges and urge and constrain them to yield and come in so that my house may be filled. Luke 14:23 Amplified. Behold, I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wary and wise as serpents, and be innocent, harmless, guileless, and without falsity, as doves. Do not be anxious about how or what you are to speak, for what you are to say will be given you in that very hour and moment. Matthew 10:16-19 Amplified. Okay, God, what in the world am I doing in a neighborhood like this? Tom Bracken silently asked, as he walked along the neglected, decaying sidewalk, trying to remain in the lighted areas of his surroundings. I must have been nuts to come here all by myself. Tom had been told by his boss to determine the amount of damage that had been inflicted on the hospital, which was given to the firm to do with as they pleased. No one wanted it because it was located in an extremely dangerous neighborhood, and because the building appeared far too antiquated to renovate, although it had been in moderate use until a recent bombing blew out the front door and some of the windows. Now that he saw the damage and overall condition of the building, he made up his mind to hand this job over to Jimmy, his apprentice, as soon as he got back to the office. The moment he stepped in the door, he knew he wanted no part of this project. In fact, he couldn't understand why his boss would even consider it in the first place. Almost fleeing the building, Tom traveled at a fast pace as his assessment of the neighborhood barraged his thoughts. The pace and his constant vigilance sent him tripping over a small chunk of concrete, which had separated itself from the overused and abused sidewalk. A nearby, rusty lamppost stopped his fall as he lunged and held it tightly until he could regain his footing. Boy, I'm sure glad I don't live anywhere near this place. As he leaned against the post, he raised his leg across his knee to look at the scuff inflicted by the concrete. Wetting his finger and rubbing the damage to his shoe, he mumbled, wishing the posted signs had allowed him to park closer. Traffic had been minimized in the area of the hospital since several bombings had taken place in a short period of time. Once I'm out of here, I'm gone for good, he vowed in his heart as he zeroed in on the location of his car and hurried toward it. Tom's vehicle was now only 4 blocks away in a well-lit parking lot. He minimized his fear of being alone on the city streets in this kind of neighborhood, as each step he took brought him closer to his destination, his getaway car. Once he made it around the corner, he would be able to see the lot. That thought made him feel a little better. Unfortunately, the darkened block right in front of him caused him to imagine that unthinkable peril lurked behind every bush, down every stairwell, and in every yard, especially those that imprisoned vicious-sounding dogs that ran aggressively to the chain-link fence as he passed by. He found himself walking cautiously on the road near the curb, just in case one of the fences broke loose, as an agitated dog bounded against it, protecting its worthless domain. Forcing himself to concentrate on the neighborhood architecture, what else would an architect do in this situation? He avoided escalating his state of mind from fear to panic. Tom marveled as he walked past houses long past their prime. They seemed like silent tombs staring at the dirtied street. Numb from years of neglect, their outward appearance seemed to indicate the dying inside of them. totally unfamiliar with this kind of neighborhood, and unaware of any potential for happiness or life of any kind behind the dingy, brown-stained shades, Tom was confused about his feelings. On the one hand, he hated what poverty had done to the people who were living there. Righteous indignation rose up within him. How could this happen? On the other hand, a compassion stronger than he had ever felt began to stir in his heart. Imagine the children, the broken, the hurting, who must live behind the peeled paint of every front door and eventually become a counterpart to the decaying exterior of every residence. Did year after year of bad decisions or bad luck, or just plain bad everything bring the residents of the dilapidated structures to this point? He questioned. Was there ever a time when someone was able to leave this kind of life? Tom felt a different kind of sadness, one that embodied hopelessness and helplessness at the same time. This must be how some of these people feel all of the time. Then he noticed the little American flags in almost all of the windows, symbolizing the owner's love for their country and the freedoms that they possess. Somehow those tiny flags transformed impersonal dwellings into homes with people very much alive in them, thinking, feeling, people with dreams and hopes just like he had. How different can we be, Tom thought. Maybe someday I should take the time to really get to know someone who lives like this. Maybe... Reason put an end to those thoughts. Tom knew that a lot more than distance separated him from anyone who lived in this neighborhood. Passing a hedgerow of dried lilac bushes, Tom was startled as a young boy of 8 or 9 years of age ran into him while pursuing a basketball down the nearby driveway. In reflex action, Tom caught the ragged object and automatically flipped it back to its owner. "Nice ball," was all he could muster, as the boy and his playing partner instantly overcame their surprise at his intrusion into their lives and spat foul words of disdain in his direction. "What are you doing here, rich man?" They tried to intimidate Tom as he walked a little faster past them toward his mobile refuge. Much to his relief, the presence of 2 men sitting on a bench at the end of the block stopped the 2 boys from following him. Their helpless fish was off the hook, and by the looks of his clothes, a well-to-do one at that. As Tom neared the bench-sitters, something rose up within his heart that took his mind off his fear. Both men were disabled. One had a leg missing, and the other had lost his right arm and shoulder. His face was visibly disfigured too, assuming that they had been hurt in some of the past terrorist activities or possibly in Vietnam. His heart of compassion reached out to them. He wanted to do something to help them. Maybe I could tell them about the love of Jesus. The thought took him by surprise, even though he did have his little pocket Bible with him, having gotten into the habit of carrying it around ever since he became youth minister at his church. It was really more for show, a way of making a statement to the kids more than anything. He hadn't opened it for quite some time. In fact, he couldn't remember where it was in his briefcase. "I'm sure these guys have no desire to hear about Jesus or anything else from someone like me," he rationalized. Anyway, it had been quite some time since he last told anyone about Jesus. He slowed his pace long enough to deliver a simple, wordless acknowledgement and half-hearted smile, and then continued quickly on his way. Tom didn't want to wait for the light to change at the intersection, but there was enough traffic to cause him to stop, stand, and pray like crazy. With his back to the 2 men, he could hear their jibes and laughter at his expense as a seeming eternity of seconds passed. Just as he was about to step off the curb, one of the men stopped laughing long enough to address him. "Hey, stranger!" the man called to him. Tom turned around. "What you doing in this neighborhood?" he said with a knowing grin. "You a little out of place, ain't you?" he continued, giving his buddy a little elbow jab to show he was about to have some fun with the outsider. "But them are some pretty nice shoes," he said, looking at Tom's shiny, maroon-colored penny loafers. Tom looked down for a moment at his very out-of-place shoes, and then at the one-legged man. "I could use that right shoe," the legless man teased as he leaned forward on the bench. The man put his hand to his chin and furrowed his brow as if making a decision on whether or not he should buy the shoe. The comment made both men laugh uproariously. One of them laughed so aggressively that he began to choke. which loosed some phlegm from his throat and sent it flying right next to Tom's foot. "You must have some kind of story to tell us, po city folk," the second man spoke, becoming suddenly solemn. "So get on with it." Tom, startled at the seemingly open invitation and an opportunity to follow through on his thoughts of a little while ago, began telling them that he had just finished an inspection of the hospital down the street, and then somehow found himself flowing into a presentation of the gospel as the two men sat, stupefied by the stark transition. For a time they seemed mesmerized and simply stared and listened. As near as Tom could determine, they appeared to be held silent, almost captive by some unknown force. Then, as if released from unseen restraints, both men became visibly agitated, almost angry. "Look, we got no need for God or Jesus or any of that religious stuff. We got everything we need right here," the legless man reaffirmed. "Unless you give me your right shoe," he continued, looking into Tom's eyes with a dead, serious intensity. "Yeah, or unless you got some extra money in them fine pockets," the other man said. Tom knew that it was time to go. These guys were interested in only one thing from him, and it wasn't Jesus. He knew that if he stayed any longer, they would find a way to get it, even in their impaired physical condition. He turned and walked across the road without saying anything. If he hadn't been frightened out of his wits by the blaring horn that erupted from the car that he had stepped in front of in his haste to get away, he would have been privy to some foul cursings from the two hapless men. When he did reach the other side of the road, he momentarily turned back in time to receive a physical, one-fingered statement of their displeasure. Actually, Tom was somewhat relieved that the men cut his story short. He still had several blocks to go, and the early evening light gave way to an eerie, darkened atmosphere. He couldn't wait to get inside his car. It was getting late now, and growing frightfully darker by the minute. Shadows turned threatening, and the somewhat unfamiliar became totally foreign. Tom began to walk even faster after glancing at his Rolex. Fear rose up in him. He had to consciously repress it, or it would easily turn to panic as he heard his own footsteps echoing on the pavement. Almost at jogging speed, Tom turned the corner to Beecher Street when something caught his eye. "Nice rags, man!" Tom heard from one of the darker doorways. Tom stopped so fast he almost fell as his leather-soled shoes slipped against the concrete pavement. His eyes, wide with fear, focused on the figure emerging from the shadows. "Yeah, hey, look at the Bible, man," came a second voice from the side of the building, referring to the small Bible that Tom had taken from his briefcase during his conversation with the two men on the bench. Now, how he wished he were still a few blocks away, even with them. The men had been watching Tom for some time, waiting for the right moment to approach him. In fact, they had targeted him the minute they saw his car pull into the parking lot earlier that day. They had considered making their move when he was on his way into the hospital, but decided that it would be easier and safer to do it later. The later, the better. All afternoon they plotted their strategy, even practicing their attack while waiting for him to emerge from the hospital's makeshift yet secured front door. In cat-like fashion, the three tracked him all the way back from the hospital, just waiting for the perfect time to act. Tom spun in reaction to the second voice, then turned back in the direction he had been heading. For an instant, he thought of running toward his car, which was now only 2, but seemingly 52 blocks away. "You a preacher, man?" came a third voice that belonged to a steely-eyed person who moved in front of him, blocking his only escape. "Preacher, man, you shouldn't be walking all alone in this part of town," he continued. "Yeah," the first voice said as he moved directly to Tom's right. "Someone might see those fine clothes and think you might have a lot of money or something," he continued. "Do you have a lot of money, preacher man?" the third man said as he pulled something from his pocket. Tom heard a definite click. The light from the lone street lamp danced off the shiny metal switchblade knife, and as it did, Tom's heart sank. He could actually feel the blood drain from his face, and he knew there was way more to this than money. As each man became more visible, it struck Tom that even though their faces and clothes were different, they all looked the same. Their baseball caps were all cocked at precisely the same angle, and their eyes, Facial expressions and movements all gave the situation the feel and appearance of a well-rehearsed play. It was as though tough had been practiced, and the next choreographed move could almost be anticipated. It seemed to him that the young men were actually reveling in making him afraid. He sensed that they aimed to draw out this event, giving them more time to instill fear into their prey. They were definitely experts. Consequently, a sense of fear, anxiety, dread, and helplessness greater than Tom had ever felt before swept over him. Unfortunately, an involuntary, nervous smile formed on Tom's face. This only aggravated his captors. His initial assailant gave him a slap across the face in violent reaction to what looked like a smirk. The second grabbed him by the arm and spun him around, forcing him deeper into the shadows. Tom literally saw his life flash in front of his eyes as the third man, who now proudly displayed his knife, strutted toward him. The man in the shadows held Tom, twisting his arm behind him, and secured him by grabbing his hair and jerking his head back. As the man with the knife feathered the side of his neck with the blade, Tom experienced his warm, foul breath against his face and up his nostrils. Playtime was over. Gripping anger and hatred zeroed in on Tom as the man's face inched closer. "You think this is funny, preacher man?" the man said slowly. "You think you're going to live to tell your pretty wife about this? I think we need to show you how funny it's going to be to die slowly right here, right now." The man pressed the edge of the knife to Tom's throat, poised to finish what he'd started. Tom held his breath. End of chapter 1.